Hello friends, and thank you for joining me as we continue our journey through the book of Genesis. I am the Bible Paladin and will be your guide as we look at the scriptures through the lens of both yesterday and today. We'll be reading chapter 24 and hear about the story of Abraham and his dying wish and what his servant has to go through in order to fulfill this. Now this chapter is fairly long, not because it necessarily contains a lot of content, but rather because of the style in which it is written. We've seen this before. Oftentimes when a story seems to be repeated more than once. Now this is not done because of multiple authors, but rather because of a stylistic choice. It is similar to the way in which many of us learned how to write an essay in school. First you tell the audience what you're going to write, and then you write it, and then you tell them what you wrote. Now this is similar in the way that oftentimes the prophets are spoken about. God tells the prophet something that is going to happen. The prophet tells the people, the prophecy is then revealed, and then God tells them what happened. Wait. Before this gets any more confusing, let's just enter into the narrative. It begins with Abraham nearing the end of his life, and he sends his servant back to the land of his origin in order to find a wife for his son Isaac. So we ask the Lord to bless our reading of the sacred word and open our hearts and minds to understand its meaning. Abraham had now reached a ripe old age, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. Abraham said to the senior servant of his household, who had charge of all his possessions, "Put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not procure a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I live, but that you will go to my own land and to my kindred to get a wife for my son Isaac." The servant asked him, "What if the woman is unwilling to follow me back to this land? Should I then take your son back to the land from which you migrated?" "Never take my son back there for any reason," Abraham told him. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house in the land of my kin, and who confirmed by oath the promise he then made to me, I will give this land to your descendants. He will send his messengers before you, and you will obtain a wife for my son there. If the woman is unwilling to follow you, you will be released from this oath. But never take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore to him in this undertaking. The servant then took 10 of his master's camels, and bearing all kinds of gifts from his master, he made his way to the city of Nahor in Aram Naharaim. We're reminded that Abraham has lived a long life, and God has blessed him abundantly. And then Abraham calls in his most trusted servant, the one who is really in charge of all of his household and possessions and everything else. And we see another form of ancient oath. Abraham tells him to put his hand under his thigh. Now this oath can mean a couple of things, and probably means both. For the Hebrews, it was believed that one's descendants or one's children issued from the father's thigh, which is where they get the word direct descendants. And so in doing so, of course, this oath has to do with Abraham's descendants, with his children. He is setting up Isaac for success. But it also can invoke a curse if the oath is not followed. And so for the servant, if he does not do what he is supposed to do, he would suffer, it was believed, that he would suffer sterility. And so what is it that he is supposed to do? Well, to go back to Abraham's homeland and to procure a wife for Isaac. So he'll be returning to where his brother Nahor lives, whom we are reminded about in chapter 22. During this time, it was desirable to marry within the family to keep the bloodline pure. For this reason, Abraham does not want Isaac to marry a Canaanite woman. He also refuses to let him return to his homeland for fear that he would not come back to the land promised them from God. Abraham then tells the servant that God will send an angel before him. In this case, the angel seems more of a guide than a messenger, but still acts as the voice and presence of God. Once the promise is made, the servant prepares to leave, fully laden with gifts that he has for the family if a bride for Isaac is to be found. And so let us turn to verse 11 as we continue and we hear about the prediction of what will happen. Near evening, at the time when women go out to draw water, he made the camels kneel by the well outside the city. Then he prayed, "Lord, God of my master Abraham, let it turn out favorably for me today, and thus deal graciously with my master Abraham. While I stand here at the spring and the daughters of the townsmen are coming out to draw water, if I say to a girl, 'Please lower your jug that I may drink,' and she answers, 'Take a drink, and let me give water to your camels too,' let her be the one whom you have decided upon for your servant Isaac. In this way, I shall know that you have dealt graciously with my master." As you may have noticed by now, wells are important in the Bible. Not only do they point to the importance and sacredness of the land which produces water, but they also serve as symbols of life and the sustainment of life. Angels also appear at the wells and make promises. So a well, culturally speaking, would be where the women would go to draw the water. And because of this, oftentimes it would be a place where men would go to meet women. And so we see Abraham's servant first invoke God, and even using the name of Abraham, which will later even become a title for God, the God of Abraham. And now he is not testing God when he replays this scenario in his mind. Instead, he is going on the promise that Abraham gave him, that an angel would go ahead of him and make this mission successful. And so now we know what he hopes will happen, so let's read to see if it does happen. He had scarcely finished these words when Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with a jug on her shoulder. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin, untouched by man. She went down to the spring and filled her jug. As she came up, the servant ran toward her and said, "Please, give me a sip of water from your jug." "Take a drink, sir," she replied, and quickly lowering the jug onto her hand, she gave him a drink. When she had let him drink his fill, she said, "I will draw water for your camels too, until they have drunk their fill." With that, she quickly emptied her jug into the drinking trough and ran back to the well to draw more water, until she had drawn enough for all the camels. The man watched her the whole time, silently waiting to learn whether or not the Lord had made his errand successful. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold ring weighing half a shekel, which he fastened on her nose, and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels, which he put on her wrists. Then he asked her, "Whose daughter are you? Tell me, please. And is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She answered, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. There is plenty of straw and fodder at our place," she added, "and room to spend the night." The man then bowed down and worshipped the Lord, saying, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not let his constant kindness toward my master fail. As for myself also, the Lord has led me straight to the house of my master's brother." The sacred author reminds us of Rebekah's lineage and describes her as a beautiful virgin. And then without hesitation, she offers water to the servant of Abraham and his camels. So far, so good. And then, after he gives her jewelry, he asks about her lineage, which he tells us whose daughter she is. And again, the servant says, "Okay, this must be the one." In addition to that, she offers him a place to stay and a place for his camels to be cared for. And so immediately, the servant praises God, realizing that his mission is indeed coming out to be as he had hoped. And so let's read to see what continues to happen. Then the girl ran off and told her mother's household about it. Now Rebekah had a brother named Laban. As soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister Rebekah and heard her words about what the man had said to her, Laban rushed outside to the man at the spring. When he reached him, he was still standing by the camels at the spring. So he said to him, "Come, blessed of the Lord, why are you standing outside when I have made the house ready for you, as well as a place for the camels?" The man then went inside, and while the camels were being unloaded and provided with straw and fodder, water was brought to bathe his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. But when the table was set for him, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my tale." "Do so," they replied. Rebekah runs back home to her family to tell them what happened, and Laban, her protective brother, probably wants to go out to the well and see who this man is that is speaking to her. But once he sees her jewelry, suddenly his attitude changes, and he goes out and offers hospitality to the stranger. And the hospitality, of course, in the washing of their feet, offering them a place to stay, taking care of their animals. So before Abraham's messenger sits down to eat with them, he says, "I must tell you the story. I must explain to you what I'm doing here." And so we're going to hear the story all over again. "I am Abraham's servant," he began. "The Lord has blessed my master so abundantly that he has become a wealthy man. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male and female slaves, and camels and asses. My mother's wife Sarah bore a son to my master in her old age, and he has given him everything he owns. My master put me under oath, saying, 'You shall not procure a wife for my son among the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live. Instead, you shall go to my father's house, to my own relatives, to get a wife for my son.' When I asked my master, 'What if the woman will not follow me?' he replied, 'The Lord in whose presence I have always walked will send his messenger with you and make your errand successful. So you will get a wife for my son from my own kindred of my father's house. Then you shall be released from my ban. If you visit my kindred, and they refuse you, then too you shall be released from my ban. When I came to the spring today, I prayed, Lord, God of my master Abraham, may it be your will to make successful the errand I am engaged on. While I am standing here at the spring, if I say to a young woman who comes out to draw water, Please, give me a little water from your jug, and she answers, Not only may you have a drink, but I will give water to your camels too. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has decided upon for my master's son. I had scarcely finished saying this prayer to myself when Rebekah came out with a jug on her shoulder. After she went down to the spring and drew water, I said to her, Please, let me have a drink. She quickly lowered the jug she was carrying and said, Take a drink, and let me bring water for your camels too. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. When I asked her, Whose daughter are you? She answered, The daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, born to Nahor by Milcah. So I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her wrists. Then I bowed down and worshipped to the Lord, blessing the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right road to obtain the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. If, therefore, you have in mind to show true loyalty to my master, let me know. But if not, let me know that too. I can then proceed accordingly. He begins by introducing himself as Abraham's servant, which would get everyone's attention, for this was their kinsman. And then he talks about how God has blessed him abundantly, and he has become very wealthy. And this, of course, will help the family to understand two things. One, that their daughter will be well taken care of. And also, that the God of Abraham is real, and that he has blessed and provided for his family. He also doubles down on the wealth angle by saying that Abraham's son has inherited everything. And so Laban, who we will find out later, is a bit of a greedy man. And so his eyes are probably already watering at this point, thinking about the wealth that he can get from Abraham. And so the servant then recounts the whole story, as he had told before, showing them that this truly came from God, that God had arranged this meeting to happen. And then he asks the family, Is this your wish? Because in that time, in that culture, the family, the father specifically, would arrange for the marriage of his daughter. And so he would have to get their permission before he would take Rebekah with him. And so let's see how the family responds. Laban and his household said in reply, This thing comes from the Lord. We can say nothing to you either for or against it. Here is Rebekah, ready for you. Take her with you, that she may become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has said. When Abraham's servant heard their answer, he bowed to the ground before the Lord. Then he brought out objects of silver and gold and articles of clothing and presented them to Rebekah. He also gave costly presents to her brother and mother. After he and the men with him had eaten and drunk, they spent the night there. When they were up the next morning, he said, Give me leave to return to my master. Her brother and mother replied, Let the girl stay with us a short while, say 10 days. After that she may go. But he said to them, Do not detain me. Now that the Lord has made my errand successful, let me go back to my master. They answered, Let us call the girl and see what she herself has to say about it. So they called Rebekah and asked her, Do you wish to go with this man? She answered, I do. At this, they allowed their sister Rebekah and her nurse to take leave, along with Abraham's servant and his men. Invoking a blessing on Rebekah, they said, Sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads, and may your descendants gain possession of the gates of their enemies. So Laban and his whole household are moved by the servant's story, and they agree that it must be God's will that Rebekah goes to marry Isaac. For Laban, this may have had something to do with the wealth, yet they still send her off with her blessing. The servant, for his part, as he typically does, bows down and gives thanks to God. It shows him really throughout the story as a person of faith, as someone who realizes that this is God's will. And so he continues to give praise and thanksgiving to the Lord who made this happen. And so, just as they had offered, he stays the night with his servants, and then the next morning they are prepared to leave. Now, the reality must have sank in for the family, and they say, well, can Rebekah maybe stay for 10 days before leaving? But the servant says he's in a hurry. He wants to get back to his master. Abraham, of course, is getting old. It's a long journey, and so he wants to take her. And interestingly, they actually ask Rebekah what she wants to do. Now, this wasn't whether or not she wanted to get married. That was already arranged, and it was very common throughout this culture to arrange marriages for their children. But instead, it was really whether she wanted to stay or whether she wanted to leave immediately. And this gives Rebekah a chance to give us her point of view. She also believes that this is the will of God. She feels that she is called to do this, and so she wants to leave immediately as well. There is no waiting. So we hear that she and Abraham's servant and their servants all prepare and go back to the promised land. Of course, before they depart, she is also given a blessing by her family. Now, this blessing sounds familiar. It's because it really echoes the same blessing that was given to Abraham and will also be given to Isaac, that their descendants will be great and that they will overcome their enemies, or basically they will inherit the land. Then Rebekah and her maid started out. They mounted their camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and went on his way. Meanwhile, Isaac had gone from Beer Lahai Roi and was living in the region of the Negeb. One day toward evening he went out in the field and he looked around. He noticed that camels were approaching. Rebekah too was looking about, and when she saw him, she alighted from her camel and asked the servant, "Who is the man out there, walking through the fields toward us?" "That is my master," replied the servant. Then she covered herself with her veil. The servant recounted to Isaac all the things he had done. Then Isaac took Rebekah into his tent. He married her, and thus she became his wife. In his love for her, Isaac found solace after the death of his mother Sarah. So the caravan sets out, and instead of going back to Abraham, they go back to Isaac. And so many commentators believe at this point Abraham had probably already passed away, because the servant takes Rebekah directly to Isaac, and we don't hear about Abraham being there, being present when they marry. And so even though this marriage was really arranged by God, we do see that there is an attraction between Rebekah and Isaac. She sees him in the field when they are approaching, and he sees her. It also says that he loved her in his love for her. And so he takes her into his tent, which is really synonymous in both act and deed for marrying her. And so we begin really this new chapter in the story of the patriarchs. The theological meaning behind this story is the continuation of the promise that God made with Abraham as we see it begin to be played out with the next generation. The relationship that God has with Abraham is extended to his household, which includes his chief steward. It is only assumed that this relationship will continue with the son Isaac as well. There is also an interesting correlation of the power and influence of Abraham echoing that of the divine. God sends his angels, his messengers, to communicate and guide this journey, while Abraham sends his own messenger or servant to fulfill what God has promised. There exists a special kinship between them, which is shown in the trust that Abraham has in God, and also the success of the journey on which he sends his steward. We see the fruits of the journey that Abraham has been on throughout his life, and it continues to this point where he hands over his possessions and trust and passes on his faith to the generations that will follow. Up to this point, God has blessed Abraham and taken care of him. Now he provides the means for this care to continue for his son. The story of the servant's journey shows divine providence and begins to extend the faith of Abraham to the rest of his family. And this becomes more than a personal spirituality and shows the first signs of becoming a larger religion. Both the faith of the servant and that of Rebekah can give us inspiration as we read this account today. The servant trusted that God would give him signs and make his journey successful. And this gave him confidence, and so that when he dealt with Nahor's family, even at the times when they seemed hesitant to let Rebekah go, he knew that God would continue to be with him and make him successful. No doubt we have at times asked God for a sign when we have been asked to make some important decision. We have probably played out a number of scenarios in our head, just as the servant did, trying to determine the right way to respond. The signs may not always be as easy to discern as the one that the servant received, but we can certainly learn from him. He began each phase of his journey with a prayer and asked for God's guidance. He bowed down in prayer every time he was aware of God's response. Gratitude was as significant as petition in his prayers, if not more so. It shows the importance of practicing gratitude in our relationship with God. Rebekah is also an example of strength and faith in this story. We have seen the value of hospitality throughout the Abraham epic, and it continues with her treatment of the servant. Without knowing of the sign that he is looking for, she immediately offers him water. She cares for his camels and offers him lodging. She then takes the initiative to run home and tell her family about this stranger. Upon hearing the story of the God of Abraham and the servant's account of what transpired, she is eager to go with him. Rebekah hears the call of God and leaves everything she knows to follow him. She, like Abraham, is traveling to an unknown land to begin a new life with only the faith in a God that she only just encountered. Such a story of faith and trust can only but inspire us to take a chance on whatever or wherever God is calling us at this point in our life. It can often be unknown and scary, but God has a way of lighting the path. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I do hope that you have found this to be inspirational and maybe give you the courage to follow wherever God is leading you. Please join me next time as we hear about the end of Abraham's life and also begin the story of Isaac and Rebekah. Until next time, pray often and do good.